Albania's ruling party faces allegations of corruption and electoral fraud. Will protesters force Prime Minister Edi Rama to step down? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Albania's political unrest. Edi Rama thought his biggest challenge this year was to negotiate Albania's membership in the EU. But now the Prime Minister is fighting to keep his job. Albania's opposition has resigned from parliament, and anti-government demonstrators have burned portraits of the Prime Minister. They accuse his Socialist Party of manipulating the 2017 election, and prosecutors are investigating. Rama seems dismissive and says democracy isn't negotiable. But this is Albania, where a Ponzi scheme caused a civil war in 1997. And just last month, an opposition politician physically attacked Rama during a session of parliament. So while the PM might want voters to express their discontent during the next election, what happens until then is anyone's guess. Yola Abdavid went to Albania and filed this report.
Young people are leaving. Not just Albania, but all the Balkan countries. No work means no future in Europe's poorest region, even if they eventually join the EU and remove the hard border with Kosovo.
We can have two countries with no borders, and then what? We will have the same corrupted political elites, the same economical interests who are led by a bunch of people who are exploiting this country and Kosovo.
After decades of little investment, some governments now want closer ties in the Balkans, especially if trade barriers are removed between Albania and the almost 2 million ethnic Albanians who live in Kosovo.
A free trade agreement and free trade with Kosovo, it's crucial for us and also for Kosovo. First of all, we have to look on our markets, our potentiality, our possibility, and after that to look forward in the other markets. So I think that what the Serbians think or Macedonians think about this, I don't think that it's an issue for us.
But recent demonstrations show the depth of opposition to the government. Protesters have complained about corruption and what they say is the absence of the rule of law. But the question for many in Albania is just how democratic is the centre-right Democratic Party? And how liberal is the ruling Socialist Party? There's a skepticism about what some see as the authoritarian stance of many established politicians, and how the voters don't seem to enjoy the same benefits as those in power.
Unfortunately, Albanian government is not working a lot to fight these things in Albania, which is it's not fighting properly corruption, is not fighting properly organized crime. And we are, I can say, the only country in the world without a constitutional court, a Supreme Court, which is not usual for a normal country.
Politically, Albania is stepping into the unknown as the majority of lawmakers from the two main opposition parties have resigned.
Yeah, it's a radical change, I would say, because the opposition has decided to abandon their mandates and their representation, and now we're faced with something completely new, not only in our political scene, but I think in a European scene. It's unprecedented that a political party gives up its responsibilities and its duties.
It is an unprecedented change in a country where the past still seems to have a hold. The question now is what happens next. Yola Abdavid, the newsmakers, Tirana.
Let's go to our guest now in Tirana. Elisa Spiropali is the Socialist government spokeswoman. She's also the Minister of Parliamentary Relations. Alba Cela heads the European program at the Albanian Institute for International Studies. And Jonida Gashi is a researcher at the Institute of Cultural Anthropology and the Study of Art in Albania. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Elisa Spiropali, let me start with you. Is your government under pressure? Is the Prime Minister under pressure, given these protests and the fact that the opposition went from parliament to the streets?
Well, the pressure is an unacceptable word in a democratic system. And no, we're not under pressure. But obviously, we understand that what is going on, it's not good for the country and especially the economy. Let me give you a background on what is happening, because we feel like there are some serious misunderstandings about what's going on in the country. And the question that you're posing right now on screen that I'm seeing, it's, to tell the truth, is inappropriate.
Tell me why.
Because these are not protests by the people for the people. These are two political parties organizing protests. So it's a protest in the palace of politics. And are two parties that have lost elections in 2017, and now in 2019 are calling for a deal on the table. Mm-hmm. We're not here to make deals, we're here to get voted by the people, and that's what we're standing for. In June, we have local elections, and we're hoping that the two political parties organizing protests will use this energy to go into elections and get voted. We have a legitimate parliament, we have a legitimate government that came out of the elections of 2017 that were certified by all our partners, OSCE or ADhere here in the country, mm-hmm. the EU Commission, and all our serious institutions that do monitor Albania very, very closely. Right. In 2017, we had a deal with the opposition. It was an unprecedented deal, but it was our willingness to have a pair of elections that will not be contested. We managed to give the opposition half of the ministers. We gave them important ministries like the Minister of Interior that deals with the organization of elections, as well as Minister of Health, Minister of Education, a series of other ministries with large numbers of administration, which was their immediate concern. Then we managed to give them, for the first time in history, the head of the Central Election Committee, so was given to the opposition together with the majority in Central Election Committee, and that was to have a certified result, and that's what happened actually.
Okay,
it was
so
the
Elisa,
most serene election
in
history, and they were certified by all the international community.
You see them as sour losers. Let me ask Albacella if she believes that that question, should Prime Minister Edi Rama resign, that you see on the screen, do you believe, Alba, that that is also an inappropriate question?
Well, I think that that is a question that does not capture the reality of the crisis. There is not a normal situation. There is, of course, a political crisis, but I see that the question that you have chosen goes contrary to the process of elections, which was, as Elisa said, certified by the international observers. So yes, there is a political crisis, but it is more complex, and it should be treated as such than just your question.
Okay, so Jonida, we have the opposition leader, Basha, who issued that ultimatum to Prime Minister Rama: step down by the 16th of March or else. Is there any chance that the Prime Minister will actually do that?
I don't know. I mean, I cannot answer that. I genuinely don't know. But the real question for me is whether the resignation of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet of Ministers and new elections in the absence of substantial, essential, fundamental reform will actually change anything. And I doubt that it will change anything, actually. However, the pressure that you mentioned in your first question, I mean, yes, I think there is pressure on both the government and the opposition. But to claim that this pressure has come about unilaterally as a result of the actions of the opposition, or rather their decision to resign from parliament, is to misstate the situation.
Where does it come from?
The pressure has been building up for some time. Well, at least since the summer of 2018, Albania has no functioning High Court or Constitutional Court as a result of the so-called justice reform, which began to be implemented in earnest really after the 2017 general elections. Now, this creates an institutional vacuum, which is a pretty big one, you know, and it is easy to see how that could lead to a situation where where the state of law, the constitutional order might actually be threatened, which is the claim that the opposition have made for justifying their decision to resign from parliament. And there is something true there, right? Because also in July 2018, the government managed to pass through parliament, where it has the ruling Socialist Party has an absolute majority, a special law which effectively enabled the government to bypass the public procurement law and award a private construction company a sizable chunk of land in the historic center of Tirana, right? So the law was anti-constitutional, but the absence of a functional constitutional court created an impasse. It also became the reason for a protest, which is still ongoing, right? So I think the opposition, to claim that the opposition produced this crisis, this political crisis, unilaterally and in a fictitious way through their decision to resign from parliament is not right.
So
that
let me
said,
ask Elisa.
I do not believe that early elections will automatically solve anything.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to get to the question of snap elections in a few moments, but let me ask Elisa. From the opposition, they say the courts don't function and that the leadership is corrupt. That's why they've taken these drastic measures. Address that for us.
Absolutely, I agree that the justice reform has a lot to do with it. The opposition has been consistently against the new justice reform, which, let me quote, has been considered in all of the reports about Albania as a model for the other countries in the Western Balkans. So it's a radical reform that does address the question of corruption in the justice system, as well as the impunity that has been endemic to the justice system, but also to the political structure connected to the judiciary. So this justice reform that we have willingly, together with our partners here, the US Embassy as well as the EU delegation and their experts have worked on, and now it's producing real results through the vetting process of judges and prosecutors, have absolutely thrown out of the system, and I dare use this word, judges and prosecutors that have not done their job, but also cannot justify their wealth and other issues. So this is fundamental to changing the system in the country, and it has been considered the best reform that Albania or a Western Balkan country has undertaken. So we're proud of this reform, and we do not want to step back. And it's also the will of the European Union partners that will consider the case of Albania in June for open negotiations for this reform to go on. There is a hesitation as well. There is a fight, I must say, in the opposition side to get rid of this reform, which I'm sorry, but we cannot consent to that. Albania has to do these reforms. Obviously, they're painful in terms of breaking the connections of old structures of politics with old structures of the judiciary, but it is fundamental that we do that to have a normal country that works through rule of law and have punity in the political systems. So yes, it's not only a question of the electoral results, but also a question of fears that rise because of the justice reform.
Elisa, I know there's a lot on the wish list of this government. EU accession, getting closer with Kosovo and opening the border and so on. Why don't you fast track the process and end the crisis by calling for snap elections? If it's the will of the people to have the current government of Prime Minister Edi Rama in power, why wait for those local elections in June? Why not call for snap elections and get it all done with now, and we find out what the will of the people is right now? And then you can do everything else that you want to do.
That is unacceptable at all levels, because we cannot have disruption be a rule in this country. A few days ago, a delegation from the European Parliament, together with the rapporteur for Albania of the European Union came here and they produced a statement saying that any transition government or any other form of breaking with the current constitutional framework would be, to say the least, problematic for Albania in its EU path, because we need stability, because we need development, because we need reforms to go on, and we need the legitimacy of the government. Can you imagine what that would mean, not only for Albania, but for all other countries in the region, in the Balkans, with the current political fights and lack of consent that we have? If any opposition would decide to let's say, burn their mandate, as they're calling it, and give up on representation and betray the will of their voters, what would happen? No government would ever be able to govern, and we would go on in cyclical crisis trying to accommodate the minority. So this is unacceptable. This is a legitimate parliament, and this is a legitimate government, and definitely the mandates of the opposition are now being replaced by the people on their lists, not our lists.
Okay, Jonida, do you agree with that, that snap elections are unacceptable given that context?
I think they are, I mean, I wouldn't use the word unacceptable. I want to raise question marks about what they would solve without, as I said earlier, in the absence of structural reform. I mean, the electoral system that we have now, as of 2008, actually, after the infamous Berisha-Rama pact, is basically a closed list proportional system, which effectively means that the electorate, so the voters, vote on multi-name party lists. And basically, this clearly means that voters have very little say on how these lists are compiled, these multi-name lists, and which position the candidates have on these lists. So when they go and vote, they actually vote for the party as a whole, as opposed to the actual people who will actually represent them in parliament. And the other negative effect that this has had, and it has been demonstrated, is to strengthen the power of the party leader or the party leadership with respect to the MPs, right? And we have seen how that has been problematic, both on the side of the Socialist Party as well as the Democratic Party, so the two main parties. At the very least, as I said, I think there has to be electoral reform before there are elections. The simple rotation of power under the conditions in which we are today, I don't think it will necessarily bring about very much change. But that there is popular dissatisfaction, there very much is popular dissatisfaction. And, you know, we shouldn't talk just about the protests that have been called or organized by the opposition, which have been taking place the past few weeks, especially, you know, since they resigned their mandates. But the student protest also, which started very suddenly in early December 2018, which was, I think, the strongest indicator yet that what is needed in Albania is a fundamentally new, radically new vision about political conduct.
Okay. Let me ask Alba, what's needed? Because not only, as we heard from Jonida, not only do we have the opposition on the streets, we've also had students on the streets. Clearly there's a restlessness. How do we fix this and move forward?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind the context and the decision of the EU Council in June. We have two countries, Macedonia and Albania, which got half a rejection with a postponement last time, and this time they are waiting for the good news. And both these countries have a success story. Macedonia, the historical name agreement with Greece, and yes, Albania, the justice reform, which has been applauded. But now there is an obstacle, of course, and this political crisis is real, is serious, and should be addressed. I agree that the democratic game has rules and that the parliament and government have legitimacy due to the elections, but also it is clear that a reconsidering and an agreement is necessary if we are to have positive decision in June for the EU. Because under these conditions, it would be very easy for those skeptical EU member states like France, like the Netherlands, to use this situation as just one more excuse to say these countries are not ready yet.
Understood, yes.
shouldn't discount the seriousness of the situation.
Okay, so let me ask somebody in government, Elisa, over the past few weeks, given the crisis and the protests, have you felt that your chances with the EU have been dented from your talks with the Europeans?
Well, from all the communications, constant communications that we do have with our partners, we have an understanding about the situation. They're very informed. They have made clear statements. The EU delegation here, the office of Mogherini in Brussels, as well as the US presence here and the State Department. So they're very aware. They're in this conversation that we're having, and they have clear statements that the country needs stability, that the opposition should stop inciting violence, which is unacceptable, and they should go back to the legitimate forums like the parliament and the rest. And we're hoping that the images that come from Albania will not be misused by elements that do not want Albania or other countries in the Western Balkans to be part of the European Union. Right. We're hoping that the forces, the progressive forces, and the forces that have spoken about Albania through the European Commission decision or recommendation to open negotiations will continue, and we will open negotiations in Brussels. But definitely images that come from here can import problems or issues even there, because definitely not all the forces in the European Union or all the parties or all the member states are as understanding, right, to use an understatement. So in this situation, we are calling for the opposition to go back to come back to normality, to use the forums, to come and discuss in the Commission the electoral reform, which is very important for improving standards. We created an ad hoc commission, a bipartisan commission chaired by two prominent members of the Democratic Party and of the Socialist Party to have equal standing on electoral reform. And we have the draft ready. It's not worked by us, by the majority, by the OSCE presence here and our partners. We have it ready, and we are ready to negotiate and discuss about electoral reform. But we're not here to negotiate about the legitimacy of a government that is voted by the people. That would be absolutely unnecessary and damaging to the country. Okay.
Unfortunately, I've got to wrap. It's been great to talk to all three women on our panel, Elisa Spiropali, Alba Cela, and Jonida Gashi. Good to get a closer look at Albanian politics for a change. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for this chance.
Still to come on the program, should the UK relinquish control of the Chagos Islands? The UN's highest court says yes, but will that make any difference? And as International Women's Day kicks off, we debate whether the Me Too movement has exposed a deep divide among feminists. Mauritius may have gained independence 50 years ago, but the fate of its far-flung territory, the Chagos Islands, still remains uncertain. The UK still controls the isolated archipelago, which it calls the British Indian Ocean Territory. But now, after decades of failed legal attempts to get Britain to give it back, Mauritius may be within striking distance. The UN's highest court says the islands should be returned. It's given hope to a generation of displaced Chagos Islanders. But will it make any difference? Randolph Nogle takes a look.
The court, having found that the decolonization of Mauritius was not conducted in a manner consistent with the right of peoples to self-determination, it follows that the United Kingdom's continued administration of the Chagos Archipelago constitutes a wrongful act. Accordingly, the United Kingdom is under an obligation to bring an end to its administration of the Chagos Archipelago as rapidly as possible.
It's only a recommendation, but it packs a diplomatic punch. The International Court of Justice, or ICJ at The Hague, has taken Britain to task for what it calls its continued illegal occupation of the Chagos Islands. The court ruled they should be handed over to Mauritius.
There was no ambiguity. There is no wiggle room. They basically said the law has been broken, self-determination has not been respected, human rights have been violated. Mauritius is entitled to exercise control, sovereignty, if you like, over these islands as rapidly as possible.
Mauritius has maintained that it was forced to give up the islands in 1965 in exchange for independence, which it gained 3 years later. The British government at the time evicted the entire population. It then invited the US to build a military base on the largest of the Chagos atolls, Diego Garcia. Some of the displaced settled in Mauritius, more than 2,000 kilometers away.
Our life in Mauritius was very, very difficult. Huge poverty, facing with many problems like drugs, alcohol, jobless, prostitution, bad education. We have known the worst life.
The court's decision against the UK follows decades of legal challenges by Chagos Islanders. The UK has accepted responsibility for wrongdoing, but hasn't said whether it will relinquish control of the islands. Instead, it's called attention to the island's role in the defense of the US and UK.
It fully accepts the manner in which the Chagosians were removed from the Chagos archipelago and the way they were treated thereafter was shameful and wrong. And it deeply regrets that fact.
As part of the advisory opinion, the judges said all UN member states are obliged to cooperate to complete the decolonization of Mauritius. That includes the US, which continues to operate its military base on Diego Garcia. What happens next rests with the UK government, which is currently wrestling with its own internal issues of self-determination. And while the ruling has breathed new life into Chagos Islanders' hopes to return home, it's unclear whether it will be enough to force the UK to close this chapter of its colonial history. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Let's go to our guests now. In the Mauritian capital, Port Louis is the leader of the Chagos Refugee Group, Olivia Bancool. And in Tokyo, we have Konstantinos Yaloridis. He's an expert in international law and territorial disputes. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Olivia, this ICJ court ruling, is it justice for Chagosians?
Yes, it was justice for Chagosians because it's a great opportunity for our people to let the world know how we have been suffering for so many years. How the UK government banished our rights. And as you know, as Chagosian, as individual, it was impossible for us to be the International Court of Justice. But with the help of our Mauritian government, we have been able to express with evidence to show how we were living in peace and harmony. And now it's a great opportunity to let the world know, because as you know, the UK government always present themselves as a champion of human rights.
Right.
But what they did with Chagosian, many people don't aware.
Okay, but Olivier, this is undoubtedly a great opportunity to tell the world your story. It's undoubtedly an opportunity to let people know about the displacement, the dispossession, the human rights abuses. But the court ruling says the UK must return the islands as rapidly as possible. But who's going to enforce that? Who's going to force the UK to do so?
You know, even if the advisory opinion is not binding, but it has a power, because, as you know, the International Court of Justice been put in place by the United Nations, where we have all states. Among the states, we have UK and US. No one can deny that. And we think that what the opinion that have been given by the ICJ need to take in consideration. And as the judge conclusion said that we need to put an end to all the suffering of Chagosian, and at the same time to return to Mauritius what had been detached before its independence.
Right. Konstantinos, Olivier is encouraged by the ruling. Does he have good reason to be very encouraged?
I think he has good reasons, yes. Yes, this is an advisory opinion of the court, and as such, it has no binding force. Nevertheless, despite its non-binding character, this is an advisory opinion of the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, and does carry great legal weight as well as moral authority. It provides an authoritative and well-reasoned interpretation of the applicable rules of international law. Now, the UK is a country that prides itself on respect for the rule of law. To me, it is inconceivable that the UK would simply ignore this opinion.
Yes, so Olivier, throughout your struggle, you've got the UK that you're up against, and of course the United States with Diego Garcia, the military base. Has it felt like you've been David versus Goliath?
Yeah, of course. Our struggle has always been that, like David versus Goliath, because it's something that is a group of small people facing a big power. Not one power, it's two big power, US and UK. You know, but we have never given up, because we consider our fundamental rights, our dignity as all human beings need to be respected. This is why we believe in what we are doing, because it's something that, according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that every people have the right to live on his birthplace. And we cannot understand how could it be impossible for us to go and return living in Chagos, whereas other people can do so.
Konstantinos, the UK Foreign Office said, and I quote them, "The defence facilities on the British Indian Ocean territory help to protect people here in Britain and around the world from terrorist threats, organised crime and piracy." That's what the Foreign Office said. With that in mind, that's going to be their reasoning. We need this for strategic purposes. Is that going to be enough for them in the international arena, given the pressure after the ruling?
Now, the court found that the UK's administration of Chagos is a continuing internationally wrongful act, which the UK is under an obligation to cease as soon as possible. There is no silver lining here. The UK put forth some good arguments before the court, but it lost the case, and it lost it badly. And that impacts directly on the British sovereignty over Chagos. So either the UK has no sovereignty over the islands at all, or even if it has sovereignty, it's obliged to relinquish that sovereignty to Mauritius as soon as possible.
What's the next step then, Konstantinos? What's the next step in this battle?
So the ICJ found, first of all, that the detachment by the UK of Chagos from the British colony of Mauritius to make room for what is now a fully fledged US military basis in the Indian Ocean was unlawful. Accordingly, the process of decolonization of Mauritius was never legally completed. So now all states, including the UK, are under a legal obligation to cooperate with the UN to complete the process of decolonization of Mauritius. So now the UN General Assembly has the first say of what happens next.
Okay, so Olivier, tell me how you see the next stage in this battle and what you'll be doing.
Yeah, our next move will be together with the Mauritian government, because as you know, the only government who prevent us to return is the UK government. We have been fighting for many years. We have ongoing cases in the court in UK, but we never give up, because we consider it's unlawful, it's not fair what the UK do with us, because he pretended to be a champion of human rights, to protect human rights, but he abused himself about the Chagosian human rights. And this is why we consider that both with the Mauritian government, we are working together to see how will be our next move. Of course, we need to return back as a resolution to United Nations, because we should not forget there was a vote taking place in in June 22nd, 2016, where 94 votes for Mauritius and only 15 for UK. And with that, we have also the oral evidence and even the written evidence where most of the country have support Mauritius and condemned the attitude of the government. Now it's clear that things need to be moved forward.
Yeah, Konstantinos, when the actual evictions happened, diplomatic cables referred to the islanders who were evicted off their homelands as Tarzans and Man Fridays, right? So there was a fundamental deep racism also within this act of colonialism. Has Britain failed to actually come to terms with the fact that a huge injustice took place there?
No, I think the UK said that what happened to Chagosian nationals was is to be regretted. But what the court said, and I like to confine myself to that, is that post-colonial legacies in the 21st century are unlawful as a matter of international law, and no one can argue against that.
Okay, well, let's wait and see as to what happens as we enter the next stage of this battle for Chagosians trying to return to their homeland. Olivia Banco and Konstantinos Yaloridis, I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. The first International Women's Day was born out of a labor movement in New York and a peace rally in Moscow. More than 100 years later, and women's rights have evolved through the suffragist movement, the feminist revolution, and now #MeToo. But as Melinda Nucifora reports, while feminism has made great strides, it's also exposed deep divisions between its own supporters.
On March 8, they march. Women all around the world united.
Strength! Strength! Solidarity! Solidarity! Sisterhood! Sisterhood! Muslim women march! Muslim women march!
The feminist war cry has been ringing out for more than 100 years, and modern feminism looks very different to how it all began.
Once again, Caxton Hall was the London rallying point for suffragettes.
First wave feminism in the late 19th and early 20th century was largely focused on women's legal rights. The suffragettes rallied against the idea of a demure and subservient female, and it cost some of them dearly.
Most sensational of all their deeds was at Tattenham Corner in the 1913 Derby. Miss Emily Davison hurled herself at the King's horse, Anma, ridden by Herbert Jones, and lost her life.
By the 1960s, women had not only shed their corsets, but they were busy burning their bras. Betty Friedan and her book The Feminine Mystique ushered in the movement's second wave, and an era when some critics feared strong feminist ideals would destroy the fabric of society.
Join us now. Sisterhood is powerful. The battle cry of the women's liberation movement rings out down New York's Fifth Avenue as more than 10,000 militant feminists stage a one-day strike for equal rights.
Riot Girl subculture in the 90s brought about third wave feminism. The new face of the fight was Anita Hill, a lawyer who accused US Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual misconduct. Almost 30 years later, it seemed history was repeating itself.
I'll never forget watching the blank faces of the men questioning Professor Hill, dismissing her very serious, very credible allegations. Today, the parallels between Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh are clear.
Brett Kavanaugh was accused of sexual assault leading up to his own Supreme Court nomination last year, re-energising fourth-wave feminists.
A vote for Kavanaugh is a vote saying women don't matter. Yes. Let's stay together. Let's fight.
Celebrities and social media are the driving force of the modern battle, off the back of the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the Me Too movement. But this mainstream momentum doesn't appeal to everyone. Model and activist Emily Ratajkowski has been accused of being too sexy to be a real feminist. Other critics accuse the modern movement of being too commercial, as luxury labels use sisterhood slogans to sell their designer goods. But there is one thing they do agree on, that there is still so much to fight for. Melinda Nusafora, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Tsipi Aran. She's a feminist activist who spearheaded the Wiki Women's Collaborative in Tel Aviv. And in Washington, D.C., we have author, journalist and activist Shannon Lee. I thank you both for joining us on The Newsmakers. Tsipi Aran, let me start with you. We're in the year 2019. Is the war against the patriarchy, or if not the patriarchy, at least those who don't believe women should be absolutely equal to men, is that war any closer to being won?
Well, I think the nice thing about feminism in 2019 is that it has a lot of different shapes and forms. There isn't just one idea about what feminism is. There's feminism based on different identities, like there's black feminism and queer feminism. There's feminism that's more national. There's a very lively movement of feminism in India, for example. And the benefit of that is that each group has different needs. And so Indian women know what they need, and it's different than what Western women need, for example.
Shannon Lee, I remember reading Camille Paglia, who said, feminism has been hijacked by upper middle class professional women. She comes at it from an older feminist perspective, I guess, and she doesn't like the more recent forms of it. Tell me what that suggests regarding the different strands of feminism.
Oh, goodness. I don't know that I would agree, but I would say that it just suggests kind of maybe even a lack of awareness, because there's definitely a need for feminism to be more intersectional, which I think is the big push right now. And there's absolutely no reason why there cannot be feminists that identify with the whole overall concept of feminism and can center their experiences and kind of address the issues that pertain to them.
Shannon, the big thing over the past, I guess, 12 to 18 months has been the Me Too movement. What has it done for feminism?
Oh, I think it kind of speaks to a larger issue, of course. It gave us the hashtag really gave us a scope of how bad the problem is with sexual violence, and it allowed a lot of survivors to connect, which, you know, Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, has been very vocal about that being the purpose, less than targeting men. But she's also said that she created the movement to center the experience of those who are more disproportionately affected, and primarily Black girls and Black women. And so I think some of the purpose and the vision of that movement has been lost, but I don't think it has anything to do with the commercialization of feminism itself.
Right. Tsipi, when we talk about Me Too, for some men, a bunch of them could be called incels, I guess. That's what they call them on the internet. Some of them, you know, members of the alt-right and so on. They feel aggrieved. They feel very defensive about this. When they look at Me Too and they come across feminism, particularly in its digital forms, they feel attacked. They feel as if feminism just means male bashing. To what do you attribute that?
Well, I think that especially incels, which are an extreme version of this, but I think to a large extent it applies to lots of men, that men grow up in patriarchy with a sense of entitlement. That's what patriarchy basically means. There are a lot of things, like we're trained to view women and women's bodies as something that men are supposed to have access to. And that's in commercials, in porn, even just in romantic comedies and on television, and definitely in commercials. So this idea of withholding what some people feel like they have a right to is very, very upsetting to them, especially incels are people who are men who are celibate not by choice. In other words, they're the ones who feel like they're not getting what they deserve to begin with, and then they're told that they don't actually even deserve it. That's very threatening to them.
Yeah, they can't get laid and they're angry, right? So Shannon, I want to kind of I want to look at this. I want to look at this politically as well, Shannon, because within the United States, there are a lot of women who support President Trump, and by extension, they say they're supporting traditional values. I remember Kellyanne Conway in her position as a spokesperson for Trump, saying that feminism is male-bashing, feminism is anti-male at a conservative conference. Tell me what that means for you and the battle you're having within the US when you come across that type of opinion and that type of almost ideological position from other women.
Right. I think that, honestly, I think that it's a lot of noise. I think that those women are really in the minority. And when you've seen people like Trump come into office, I think the bigger and the larger point was that white women tend to vote, along the lines of where their husbands vote, and that really is something that needs to be re-examined. But I don't think that as a whole that they are majority, racist, and that they kind of identify with those ideologies. But I think that we need to kind of reel it back. And now that we kind of understand the scope of everything that's going on, and we understand that there have been protections that have gone away, that we've allowed things like the Violence Against Women Act to expire, and that is something that provides funding to social service agencies and to programs that help survivors of domestic violence. And the fact that we can't get the Equal Rights Amendment Act passed that is going to give us, equal leverage in employment and things like that. So I think it's time to go back and kind of re-examine politically how these things have impacted us, particularly since Trump got in office. But it's up to us to do the work and be educated.
Right. Sippy, as we introduce this segment, we've seen images on our wall of the suffragette movement, of trailblazers over the past 100 years or so. It's very rare to find in particularly Western democratic industrialized countries to find hard laws on the books which are anti-women, right? And I guess this is what makes it all very interesting, because when we talk of the patriarchy, it's a lot of culture, it's a lot of attitudes and so on. But in terms of actual laws on the books, it's been less and less over the years. But Shannon's brought something up now about a kind of fear that there'll be a reversal. Do you fear that there'll be a reversal of all the gains that have been made?
I think that whenever there's a movement that threatens the existing order, that it's inevitable that there's backlash. And I think that we see it with the Me Too movement, for example, that the minute it became so viral and so endemic that people started objecting to it. And I think that that's normal, and I think that backlash is actually a sign that we're succeeding. It doesn't mean that it doesn't present challenges to us, but I think that backlash means we're succeeding. The place where nobody even cares that women are activists or looking for more rights is where we have to worry, because it means that the women there don't have power.
Shannon, what's been the greatest success in modern feminism, in your opinion?
Oh, I think we can look to examples like the Me Too movement, where there have been so many people that have been able to connect just based off of their similar experiences. And I work at the advocacy level, so I do see that there's still a whole lot of hope. There's still a lot of work that is being done, and there's work that was done before Me Too went viral, and the same activists are continuing to do their work. And they're pulling in younger generations that are able to leverage social media and these different types of things. So I think that there is a lot of unity that has come out of this, and that's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward. And our goal, I think, right now is to understand, like I said, some of the politics that go into this, why it's important to us, how it impacts our communities, and also understand that there's a lot of work that went into making Me Too viral, that there was a lot of work that was done by activists stemming from, even before slavery was abolished, because people had to be, they were forced to be activists because they had no protections, so this predates even the abolishment of slavery. There were Black activists that were actively doing this work, and we're going to continue to do this work, but now people know what we're doing, and there's, like I said, there's an opportunity for us to do more because there's that visibility.
Tsipi, very finally, how can men be better allies of women without resorting to the, well, as a father of daughters, I'm outraged at this thing that happened and so on. Some of the traditional things that men say, or getting outraged at Bill Cosby and so on, right?
Well,
how can men be better allies?
Those are not ways of being a good ally, because it's still defining yourself in relation to women who are associated with you or belong to you.
Yes.
I think the first thing that men need to do is actually listen to women and believe women. You know, it doesn't mean that every single woman always says everything that is the absolute truth. But when a lot of women are talking about their experience of sexual violence, or about being belittled or being interrupted, or of feeling afraid to go somewhere at night or alone, or whatever women are talking about their experiences, it's their lived lives, and they know what they're talking about. And so trying to judge it based on one's own experience that's different is a wrong way to approach it, and I think men really need to listen to women more.
Okay, Tzippi Aaron and Shannon Lee, I wish you both a very happy International Women's Day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.